On a quiet street in late November, one house flickered to life before all the others. Strings of white icicle lights framed the roofline. A reindeer stood proudly on the lawn, its nose glowing red. A wreath with a crimson bough brightened the door. And at the center of it all were two children, Lucas and Ella Thompson, staring wide-eyed at the wonder their father had built. To them, these lights weren't just bulbs and wires. They were magic. They meant Christmas had arrived early. They meant hope. For Jake and Sarah Thompson, the lights carried something deeper. Jake's father, a man who had passed away just 2 winters earlier, had always insisted on putting the lights up early. He used to say, "You never know how many Christmases you'll get, so start celebrating while you can." That tradition, born in loss and love, was now Jake's promise to his children. Joy doesn't wait. So in mid-November, while most of the neighborhood still clung to the grayness of autumn, the Thompsons lit up their home, not to show off, not to compete, but to keep a family tradition alive. Neighbors slowed their cars to stare. Some smiled. Children pressed their noses to the glass, pointing in delight. But not everyone approved. In a community bound by strict rules and unyielding order, not everyone saw the glow as magic. Some saw it as a violation. And one man in particular, the HOA president, Robert Granger, saw it as a threat to his carefully controlled world. That night, as Jake stood outside admiring the lights with his children, Mr. Granger stood at his window across the street, scowling. He didn't see joy. He saw rebellion, and he was already preparing to strike. 2 days after the Thompsons lit their home with Christmas joy, the first envelope appeared in their mailbox. Jake almost tossed it aside, mistaking it for junk mail. But the sharp HOA crest on the corner caught his eye. His stomach tightened as he tore it open. The words were cold. Notice a violation. Exterior holiday decorations may not be displayed prior to December 1st. You are required to remove all decorations within 48 hours to comply with community standards. Failure to comply will result in fines. Jake read it twice, anger bubbling. He crumpled the paper and walked inside, tossing it onto the kitchen table. Sarah picked it up. Her eyes scanned the words, her face falling. "They're calling our lights a violation?" she whispered. "Jake, this is ridiculous." Before he could answer, Ella appeared, still in her pajamas, holding a mug of cocoa. She picked up the crumpled paper with small fingers. "Daddy, are they going to take our lights away?" she asked softly. Jake crouched, his callous hands resting gently on her shoulders. "No one's taking our lights, sweetheart. Not now, not ever." But inside, his chest burned. That evening, Jake marched across the street to Robert Granger's home. The lawn was bare, the windows dark, the house coldly immaculate. He knocked hard. When the door opened, Granger stood there in a pressed shirt, his expression as rigid as his posture. Jake held up the letter. "You sent this." Granger's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "It's a standard notice, Mr. Thompson. You're in violation of the bylaws. Rules are rules." "They're Christmas lights," Jake said firmly. "They're not hurting anyone." Granger's eyes hardened. "That's irrelevant. Uniformity keeps this neighborhood valuable. Exceptions lead to chaos. If everyone decorated whenever they pleased, this place would look like a carnival." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. "You think a little joy looks like chaos?" "Joy," Granger replied coolly, "doesn't maintain property values. Rules do. Remove the lights." And with that, he closed the door in Jake's face. At dinner, Jake retold the exchange. Sarah chewed her lip, anxiety etched in her face. "Maybe we should just wait until December," she said quietly. "I don't like this fight. The kids." Jake slammed the letter onto the table. "If we cave now, what next? Do we ask permission to smile? To laugh? These lights mean something to us. I won't let him take that." Lucas, silent until now, finally spoke. His young voice was steady. "Dad's right. Grandpa always said never back down when you know you're right." Jake looked at his son, pride mingling with resolve. The lights would stay. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This time, harsher. "You've failed to comply. Effective immediately. You are fined $100 per day until the violation is corrected." Sarah's face went pale. Jake, $100 a day? That's $3,000 a month. Jake's jaw tightened. Then let them fine us. They'll not bully this family out of Christmas. But in the quiet of the night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone at the table, staring at the notice. She imagined bills piling up, debt swallowing them, the home they built slipping through their fingers. And for the first time, she felt afraid. The next morning, whispers began in the neighborhood. Parents at the bus stop glanced at Sarah with pity, some with disapproval. That's the family fighting the HOA, one muttered. They're ruining it for everyone, another replied. Jake noticed neighbors crossing the street to avoid him. Others offered brief nods of support, but no one dared say much aloud. The Thompsons were becoming a spectacle, and the lights that once symbolized joy were now a target, drawing lines through a community that had once seemed so uniform. Each day began the same way. Jake walked a mailbox, and every day there was another white envelope stamped with the HOA crest. Inside, another fine, $100. Then another, and another. By the end of the first week, the total had climbed past $700. By the end of the second, it was well over $2,000. Sarah started keeping the letters in a folder on the counter, but it quickly bulged with papers. The red ink on the notices grew bolder, more threatening. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Failure to comply will jeopardize your property. Jake read them, tore them in half, and tossed them into the trash. But Sarah, late at night when no one was looking, would dig them out and file them neatly, terrified of what ignoring them might cost. At school, Lucas began to notice the whispers. That's the kid with the lights. A boy muttered as he walked past in the hallway. They're breaking the rules. Another said, my dad says their house is ruining the neighborhood. By the end of the week, the whispers became open mockery. Lucas was shoved once, teased again and again. At home, he sat at the dinner table in silence, pushing peas around his plate. When Sarah asked if he was okay, he muttered, it's nothing, and went to his room. Jake found him later, staring out the window at the glowing lights. They all hate us, Lucas said quietly. Jake sat beside him. No, son, they don't hate us. They're afraid. People cling to rules when they don't know how to handle joy. But what we're doing, standing up, it matters. Lucas turned to him, eyes filled with both fear and admiration. Do you promise we won't lose? Jake's chest tightened. He wanted a promise. He wanted to guarantee safety, security, victory. But he could only put a hand on his son's shoulder and say, we'll fight, no matter what. Ella felt the tension in her own way. Invitations to playdates dried up. Friends at school stopped including her in games. One afternoon, she sat on the porch steps clutching her stuffed bear, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes down the street without so much as a wave. Why don't they like us anymore? She asked Sarah, her little voice breaking. Sarah pulled her close, struggling to keep her own voice steady. Because sometimes people forget what's important. But you and Lucas, you're the reason we keep fighting. You're the reason these lights shine. Meanwhile, the HOA ramped up its attack. Notices were no longer just fines. They carried threats of liens, of legal fees, of foreclosure. The word foreclosure sent a chill through Sarah. They can't take our home, she whispered, clutching the letter. Can they, Jake? Jake read the paper slowly, his jaw tight. They can try, but I'll burn every one of their letters before I let them scare us. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. And what if trying isn't enough? Jake had no answer. The neighborhood itself became a battleground. Some homes joined the Thompsons in solidarity, hanging early wreaths and stringing up a few lights. Others doubled down on their silence, siding with Granger and the HOA. Mrs. Delgado across the street waved at Sarah one morning, smiling as she plugged in her own strand of colored bulbs. But Mr. Simmons, the dog walker, shouted across the road that evening, "You're dragging us all down. You think the rules don't matter just because your kids want to play pretend?" Jake bit his tongue, fists clenched, as Lucas and Ella stood frozen behind him. The weight pressed down heavier with every day. Bills piled up. Sarah's hands trembled when she balanced the checkbook. Lucas grew quieter. Ella cried at night. Jake, though, grew more resolute. They can fine us every day for the rest of the year, he said one evening, standing in the yard beneath the glow of the lights. But I won't tear them down. Not for Granger. Not for anyone. And though his voice carried conviction, deep down he knew the fight was only just beginning. The fines were one thing. The notices, the threats, Jake could handle those. He had thick skin, calloused by years of hard work and harder days. But when the fight started to seep into the lives of Lucas and Ella, it cut deeper than any bill ever could. At school, Lucas couldn't escape the whispers anymore. They weren't whispers now, they were taunts. That's the kid with the outlaw house. One boy jeered. Hey, does your dad think he's better than everyone? Another sneered. My mom says you're making Santa skip our neighborhood this year. Lucas tried to hold his ground, but one afternoon in the cafeteria, when a boy shoved his tray to the floor, something inside him broke. Leave me alone, he shouted, fists clenched, tears stinging his eyes. Teachers pulled him away, but the laughter followed him. That night, he told Jake. Maybe we should just take the lights down, Lucas muttered, his voice cracking. It's not worth it, Dad. I don't care anymore. Jake's heart sank. He wanted to rage at the world for making his son feel this way. Instead, he placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Son, he said, steady but heavy, sometimes the right thing feels impossible. Sometimes it costs you friends, comfort, peace. But giving in to fear costs even more. We're fighting for joy, for family. Don't ever let them make you believe it isn't worth it. Ella's struggle was quieter, but no less painful. Playdates stopped. Invitations to birthday parties disappeared. One afternoon, she came home early from school, her small face red from crying. What happened, baby? Sarah asked, kneeling to meet her eyes. They said Ella sniffled, clutching her bear. They said Santa won't come to our house because our lights are wrong. Sarah pulled her close, tears stinging her own eyes. Oh, sweetie, Santa loves joy. He loves lights. He'll never forget you. But later, when Ella was asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at another letter from HOA. The words blurred through her tears. Legal action will be pursued. She buried her face in her hands. We can't do this, Jake. It's breaking them. It's breaking us. Jake stood in the doorway, silent. He wanted to tell her it would be okay. But even he wasn't sure anymore. The family itself began to fracture. Late at night, arguments sparked. We're drowning in debt, Sarah hissed one evening. What happens when they drag us into court? What happens when we can't pay? Then we fight harder. Jake shot back. And what if fighting harder means losing our home? The silence after that question was heavy. Jake had no answer. In the hallway, Lucas whispered to Ella, they're fighting because of us. And Ella, clutching her bear tighter, whispered back, maybe we should take the lights down. The HOA, sensing blood, pressed even harder. Another letter. This one more venomous than the rest. Failure to comply has disrupted community harmony. Legal proceedings are being prepared. All fines remain enforceable. Jake crumpled in his fist, rage burning in his chest. But when he looked up and saw Ella's wide, fearful eyes, his fury turned into something else, resolve. That night, as he tucked her into bed, Ella whispered, Daddy, maybe we should stop, if it makes them happy. Jake's throat tightened. He kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart, never dim your joy just to make someone else comfortable. Not ever. The breaking point came one morning when Jake walked outside to find something sprayed across the sidewalk in red paint. Rule breakers die. Sarah gasped. Lucas froze. Ella burst into tears. Jake scrubbed the words away with raw hands until the concrete shone clean. His arms ached, but his rage burned hotter than ever. They won't scare us, he muttered, chest heaving. They can't. But as he looked at his children, pale and trembling, he knew the HOA had already done damage he couldn't erase. That evening, the knock came. Jake opened the door to find a man in a suit, papers in hand. Mr. Thompson, the man said flatly, You've been served. The HOA is suing you. Jake stared at the papers, then back at his family. Sarah's face crumpled. Lucas's fists clenched. Ella hid behind her bear. And in that heavy silence, one truth became clear. The fight for Christmas was no longer a neighborhood squabble. It was a war, and now it would be decided in court. The lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew. Some whispered with sympathy, others with disdain. At the school pickup line, Sarah overheard two mothers muttering by their cars. "They're reckless. Just take the lights down. It's embarrassing for all of us. Now the news will come." Sarah turned away, her face burning. That evening, Jake returned home to find a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Some carried signs of support. "Let the light shine," and "Christmas belongs to everyone." Others held signs of anger. "Rules are rules," and "Keep our community uniform." The air buzzed with tension. Neighbors who once shared barbecues now stood on opposite sides, glaring. When Jake stepped out onto the porch, cheers and jeers rose together. "Stand strong, Thompson," someone shouted. "Stop ruining our neighborhood," another yelled. Lucas and Ella peeked from the window, wide-eyed. Their safe little street had become a battleground. Within days, the story leapt from local gossip to local news. A camera crew parked on the curb, filming the glowing house against the dark night. Here on Maplewood Drive, the reporter announced, "A holiday display has sparked a bitter feud. The Homeowners Association has filed a lawsuit against the Thompson family for putting up Christmas lights too early." What began as a neighborhood dispute has now captured the attention of the city. Jake stood on the lawn, arms crossed, as reporters swarmed. "Mr. Thompson, why defy the rules?" one asked. Jake's voice was steady. "Because joy isn't something you schedule. My children deserve to feel the magic of Christmas, not the cold of bureaucracy." The clip aired that night, and suddenly, the Thompsons weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for families everywhere who felt crushed by rules. Support poured in. Letters arrived in the mail. Strangers donated money to help with legal costs. One envelope carried a note in shaky handwriting. "I lost my home once to an HOA. Don't let them win. We're with you." But so did the hate. Emails arrived filled with venom. Online comments mocked them. One even read, "If you want chaos, move somewhere else. HOAs exist for a reason." Sarah tried not to read them, but she couldn't help it. The words cut deep. At school, Lucas's torment grew sharper. Now it wasn't just kids teasing him. It was parents pulling their children away. "Don't play with him. He's trouble," one mother whispered. Lucas came home one day with bruised knuckles after a fight. "They said we're selfish," she muttered, shame and anger mixing. "They said you're dragging us down." Jake's chest tightened, but he didn't scold his son. He only pulled him into an embrace. "You're brave, Lucas," he said. "Brave for standing up. Don't ever feel ashamed of that." Meanwhile, Ella grew quieter, almost invisible at school. She stopped raising her hand, stopped joining in games. One night, she asked Sarah, "If the lights go away, will Santa still find us?" Sarah's heart broke. She pulled Ella into her lap, whispering, "Sweetheart, Santa doesn't care about rules. He cares about love. And we have plenty of that." But later, when Sarah lay in bed beside Jake, she admitted, "They're hurting Jake. I don't know if I can keep watching them suffer." Jake stared at the ceiling. "If we give up now, Sarah, what lesson do we teach them? That bullies win? That fear decides what's right." The trial date was set. The HOA hired an expensive law firm. Granger strutted around the neighborhood with newfound arrogance, telling anyone who would listen that order would soon be restored. Jake hired a modest attorney, paid for partly by donations from strangers who believed in their fight. The night before the first hearing, Lucas came to Jake. "Dad," he whispered, "what if we lose?" Jake looked into his son's eyes, filled with fear. "Then we lose. But at least we'll know we stood for something." By now, Maplewood Drive was no longer a neighborhood. It was a stage. Houses were either glowing in solidarity with the Thompsons or bare and silent in obedience to the HOA. And at the center, the Thompsons' home shone brighter than ever, a symbol of defiance, a beacon of hope, and a target of hate. The battle lines were drawn. The trial would decide more than fines, more than rules. It would decide whether one family's fight for joy could stand against a machinery of control. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its gray stone walls rising against the pale December sky. For the Thompsons, it felt less like a building and more like a mountain they were being forced to climb. Reporters crowded the steps. Cameras flashed. Supporters cheered as Jake and Sarah walked hand in hand, Lucas and Ella trailing behind. The children clutched their parents' coats, wide-eyed at the chaos. "Mr. Thompson, do you think you'll win?" a reporter shouted. "Mrs. Thompson, what do you say to neighbors who call you selfish?" Another asked. Jake didn't answer. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the courthouse doors. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Neighbors filled the benches, their faces a patchwork of hope, anger, curiosity. On one side sat Robert Granger, flanked by two sharp-suited attorneys. On the other, Jake, Sarah, their modest lawyer, and the weight of their children's hopes. The judge entered, commanding silence. Case 22 to 417, Maplewood Homeowners Association versus the Thompson family. The clerk announced. The HOA's lead attorney rose first, his voice smooth, precise. "Your Honor, this is not a case about Christmas. It is a case about order. The bylaws of this community exist to protect property values and preserve harmony. The Thompsons knowingly and flagrantly violated these bylaws by erecting holiday decorations before December 1st. If rules can be ignored for sentiment, then rules mean nothing. We ask this court to enforce the fines and uphold the integrity of the association." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Jake's lawyer stood next. His suit wasn't as crisp, his voice not as polished, but a conviction filled the room. "Your Honor, this case is about more than dates and bylaws. It is about family. The Thompsons' lights hurt no one. They bring joy. They honor a tradition that means everything to these children. To punish them is not to protect harmony. It is to extinguish it. Rules without humanity are not order. They are oppression." Witnesses were called. Mrs. Delgado testified first, her voice steady. "The lights made me smile every night. They reminded me of my childhood. I saw no harm, only joy." Then came Mr. Simmons, the dog walker, scowling from the stand. "It's about fairness. If they can do what they want, what stops anyone? We'll have chaos. We moved here for order, not carnivals." The room buzzed with tension as each testimony drew invisible lines deeper into the sand. Finally, the Thompsons themselves were called. Jake took the stand, his hands gripping the railing. "Why put the lights up early?" the attorney asked. Jake's voice cracked but held steady. "Because my father taught me never to wait to celebrate joy. He's gone now, but this tradition is how I keep him with me, and how I teach my kids that happiness shouldn't wait for permission." Granger's attorney pounced. "So you admit you knowingly violated the rules?" "I admit," Jake said firmly, "that sometimes rules are wrong." Gasps filled the room. Sarah's testimony was quieter, but heavier. "The letters, the fines, the whispers they've torn at our family. My children cry at night. My son gets mocked at school. My daughter thinks Santa might not come. All because we put up lights a little early." Her voice broke. "How can you call that harmony?" Then came the moment no one expected. The children. The Thompsons' lawyer asked the judge for permission, and after a long pause, the judge agreed. Lucas walked nervously to the stand. His voice was soft but clear. "I know there are rules, but my grandpa used to put lights up early. He died, and my dad wanted us to keep doing it for him. When I see the lights, I feel like he's still here. I don't want to lose that." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening. Then Ella, clutching her stuffed bear, was lifted onto the seat. She looked out at the room with wide, tearful eyes. "I just wanted Santa to find us," she whispered. "Please don't take our lights away." For a moment, the courtroom wasn't a courtroom. It was a living room filled with the glow of Christmas, with the innocence of children who only wanted to hold on to joy. The HOA attorney rose, trying to cut through the emotion. "Sympathy is not law," he said sharply. "The rules exist for a reason. If they are ignored, they cease to exist. This case cannot be decided by sentiment." But as he spoke, Even some of the HOA supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, because sentiment, or perhaps something stronger, had already filled the room. The judge called a recess. The crowd spilled into the hallway, buzzing with arguments, debates, emotions running high. Jake sat with his family in the corner, Lucas leaning against him, Ella asleep in Sarah's arms. He looked at them, weary but resolute. "We told the truth," he whispered. "Now we wait." And as the gavel called the room back to order, every heart in the chamber knew the verdict would decide more than fines. It would decide what mattered more, rules or humanity. The courtroom was hushed when the judge returned. The scrape of his chair echoed like thunder. Every eye was fixed on him, every breath caught. He looked down at the papers before him, then out at the crowd. His expression was unreadable. "This case," he began, his voice steady, "has stirred more passion than most I see in this courtroom. It has divided a neighborhood and drawn attention far beyond these walls. At its heart, the dispute seems simple. Christmas lights, displayed too early. But the true question before us is larger. Should rules exist without regard for reason, or should they be tempered by humanity?" The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. He turned toward the HOA's table. "The association has argued convincingly that rules are the glue that binds communities. Without compliance, there is disorder. This court respects that principle." Granger sat taller, a smile tugging at his lips. But then the judge shifted his gaze to the Thompsons. "And yet, this court cannot ignore the other truth, that rules applied without compassion can become weapons. That when a community uses power not to protect, but to punish, it betrays its purpose." Jake squeezed Sarah's hand. Lucas leaned forward. Ella clutched her bear tighter. The judge's voice rose, firm and clear. "The court finds the fines imposed on the Thompson family to be excessive, unreasonable, and without merit. The association's complaint is dismissed. The Thompsons may keep their lights. Effective immediately, all penalties are void." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen in silence. Then came an eruption. Applause thundered. Cheers filled the chamber. Supporters leapt to their feet. Even some who had doubted now found themselves clapping, tears in their eyes. Sarah buried her face in her hands, sobbing with relief. Jake pulled her close, his own eyes wet, whispering, "We did it. We saved Christmas." Lucas let out a shaky laugh, hugging his father tight. Ella squealed, clutching her bear to her chest. "Santa's coming," she cried. It was victory, not just in law, but in spirit. Across the aisle, Robert Granger sat pale and furious, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling. He shot to his feet. "This is madness," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're destroying order. You're destroying everything this community stands for." The gavel slammed. "Order," the judge barked. "Sit down, Mr. Granger, or you will be held in contempt." For the first time, the HOA president sat, not in control, not in triumph, but in bitter defeat. Outside, the courthouse steps were a carnival of noise and light. Supporters chanted. Reporters jostled for position. Microphones swarmed around Jake. "What do you want to say to the people watching this across the country?" one asked. Jake looked into the cameras, his voice steady, his words strong. This was never just about lights. It was about family, about standing up when you know something's wrong, about showing my kids that joy is worth fighting for. And to anyone out there facing the same fight, don't let fear steal your happiness. Ever. His words raced across television screens, social media feeds, morning shows. They became more than a statement. They became a rallying cry. That night, the Thompson house glowed brighter than ever. Neighbors came to see. Cars slowed to admire. For the first time in weeks, laughter filled the air. Sarah stood at a window, tears still fresh on her cheeks, watching Lucas and Ella dance beneath the lights. Jake wrapped his arms around her. "It's over," he whispered. She leaned against him. "No, it's just beginning, because now everyone knows." And she was right. The verdict wasn't just a win for one family. It was a spark, lighting up a truth that could not be dimmed. In the days after the verdict, Maplewood Drive looked different. The Thompsons' house still shone, of course, icicles sparkling, reindeer glowing, wreaths swaying in the winter breeze. But now, one by one, other houses began to join. A strand of golden bulbs on one porch, a glowing star on another roof. Soon, the entire street was alive with color. It wasn't uniform anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. For the first time in years, Maplewood Drive felt alive. The story spread far beyond the neighborhood. Newspapers carried headlines. HOA defeated in holiday lights battle. Family wins fight for Christmas spirit. Judge rules in favor of joy. Clips of Lucas's trembling testimony and Ella's tearful plea played on national morning shows. Jake's words on the courthouse steps, "Don't let fear steal your happiness," were replayed again and again. Letters poured in from across the country. A woman from Ohio wrote, "I fought my HOA over a garden for my autistic son. You gave me courage to keep going." A man from Texas sent a check with a note, "Lost my wife last Christmas. Your lights reminded me what it means to fight for love." Sarah sat at the kitchen table, reading them aloud with tears streaming down her face. "Jake, these people, we weren't just fighting for us. We were fighting for all of them, too." But healing at home took time. Lucas still carried the scars of ridicule. It took months before he stopped flinching when kids at school whispered. But slowly, classmates began to see him differently. Some even apologized. "You were brave," one boy said. "I don't think I could have done it." Lucas shrugged, but inside he felt stronger. He knew what it meant to stand up, even when it hurt. Ella, too, blossomed again. The night after the verdict, she ran out into the yard, spinning beneath the glow. "Santa will never forget us now," she cried. And in her laughter, Sarah heard something she thought had been lost. Innocence returning. As for Robert Granger, the verdict broke his hold. His once proud voice lost its weight. Neighbors began to whisper, not with fear, but with contempt. Within months, he resigned as HOA president, retreating into shadows of a neighborhood that no longer obeyed his iron grip. Jake never gloated. He never needed to. For him, victory was not in Granger's fall, but in his family's joy. The following Christmas, the Thompsons put their lights up even earlier, not in defiance, but in celebration. This time, no letters came. No fines. No threats. Instead, neighbors joined, stringing lights, hanging wreaths, setting out glowing snowmen. Maplewood Drive became famous, a destination for families across town. Children pressed their noses to car windows as their parents drove slowly past, marveling at the wonder. Jake stood in the yard, watching the glow spread down the street, and felt his father's presence again. "You never know how many Christmases you'll get," he heard in his mind. "So celebrate while you can." And he smiled because now he understood. Years passed. Lucas grew tall, strong, steady like his father. Ella grew graceful, kind, and radiant like her mother. They went off into the world. But every December, they came home. And every December, the lights shone, sometimes tangled, sometimes messy, but always bright. On one snowy Christmas Eve, as grown Lucas stood in the yard with Jake, he said, "Dad, those lights changed everything. For us. For the whole neighborhood." Jake's eyes glistened. "No, son, you changed everything. You and your sister reminded me what's worth fighting for." Behind them, Ella strung a new strand of lights, laughing. Sarah carried out mugs of cocoa, and for a moment, everything was still. The family, the glow, the legacy. The Christmas lights controversy had started as a fight over rules. But in the end, it was never about rules. It was about love. It was about courage. It was about a family who refused to let their joy be dimmed. And as long as the lights shone on Maplewood Drive, that truth would never be forgotten.